This article talked about the idea of cities mixing the concepts of a city and a country. And, in my town of Poway, our motto is the city in the country, which creates a lot of friction here in town because we've had a lot of housing development in Poway that has really irked a lot of old timers in Poway, irked a lot of the NIMBYs in Poway. And they're saying, wait a minute, this is the city in the country, and you're blowing up the country. And what was interesting is that this article explored this topic because a lot of other cities are kind of going through this because as California gets more and more population, the urban sprawl spreads from the inner city to the suburbs, and from the suburbs out into more rural communities that have traditionally been sort of, quote, country towns. Now, my hometown of Poway hasn't been a country town probably for 50 years. I mean, a legit kind of one stoplight country town with a hitching post and all that. I mean, you go back 100 years, it was definitely that. I mean, the stagecoach used to come through Poway back in the day, back in the 1800s. But there's been a lot of disruption in a lot of these cities. And this article, which I found, it talks about this. The subtitle was "The Rise of Blandville," and I kind of want to walk you through a couple of these ideas. And they talks a little bit about how in Europe, they understand the difference between city and country. I mean, cities are dense, highly dense populations, and once you get beyond those city limits, you end up getting into a lot more countryside. Where here in America, a lot of our cities, there's resistance to high density. Now, big cities, obviously like New York, have overcome that, but a lot of other big cities are refusing. Even San Francisco has strong zoning regulations that prevent high rises. I mean, you go out to the western part of the city of San Francisco in the Sunset and Richmond district, those are all single family homes. Now, granted, they're right on top of each other, but there are height limits. I mean, there's a lot of resistance to housing in the urban areas, or at least increasing the density. And so it sprawls out. And so it's now affecting a lot of these rural communities. But not saying that we want to be like Europe. I'm just saying Europe has understood this and had figured it out. I don't think America has figured this out. And according to this article, Americans want it all. We want, single family homes. We want big yards. We want city conveniences. We want quiet neighborhoods. We want open space. We want our cul-de-sac with our big wide street, with big front yards. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like about that. I live in a big house on a big piece of property, and we like that. I mean, I understand why people like that, but it's this mentality of trying to, when they put in these housing developments in cities that were previously kind of countryside, they begin to lose a lot of their character. And then you add on to this housing crisis, this pressure for more and more housing. It creates so much disruption and friction in a lot of different communities. But yeah, in America, we want it all. I mean, we want suburbs. We want to have shopping centers that are convenient to us, and we want no traffic on our drive to that shopping center. We want to have cities that have robust infrastructure for sewage and water and roads and a great recreational park system. Okay, but you're going to need people in those cities to fund a lot of this, going back to property taxes, to fund a lot of that to make it happen. And so a lot of these cities are getting squeezed financially, and also the character of their cities are changing dramatically. And so what we're getting in here in California is that we're getting, let me pull up the right slide here. We're getting, these big wide roads. I mean, I look at Poway Road here in my hometown. It's just turned into a cluster. We're getting big box stores, giant parking lots, too much traffic, cities that are just completely not walkable. We hear a lot about that in some of these communities. We want a walkable city. We want to be able to walk out of our house and walk down the street to a restaurant or a coffee shop, Or, we want to be able to not have to drive all the time, not be dependent on cars all the time. Some people think that means we need to have mass transit, but other people think we just need to make it walkable. In other words, to integrate a lot of this. But zoning typically prevents that. Zoning sets it up where certain areas, it's just single family homes. And you're not allowed to put a corner market or a little restaurant in those single family home neighborhoods. It's illegal, against the law. And the only way you can get there is if you take, a reasonably long bike ride, probably not going to walk, or you're going to get in your car and drive. So we're ending up with like this obliteration of the country. And the cities, when I say city, I mean, an incorporated municipality. These cities now are having these identity crises. And I think Poway is one of those cities. Are we a city, or are we a country town? Or are we part of the suburbia of greater San Diego County? In my opinion, this is a suburban town. This is a suburban town where people raise families. There's a huge percentage of single family homes. There's apartments, but not that many. This is where there's good schools and little league and softball and soccer. And, there's community festivals, and it's like a strong suburban city. But when your motto is the city and the country, it creates, what's the right word for it? It creates a disconnect amongst the people in the community. Well, how come we're not a country, and why are you building more housing if we're a country? So it creates a lot of this conflict. So you end up with this sort of blend of urban and rural. And according to this article, soulless, sprawling, overly wide streets, a dead downtown, huge setbacks, car dependent, and underutilized parks. Oh my God. I read that and I was like screaming. I go, that is Poway. I mean, because like for example, like that picture right there on my screen it looks like Claremont Mesa Boulevard in San Diego, but it looks like kind of like a bigger version of Poway Road. In our community, when they are building more and more housing, one of the big complaints amongst the NIMBYs in town is that they need to be set back off the street. We need setbacks, which means is that the buildings can't be built right up to the sidewalk. You need to have like the building to be built like, 100 feet or 200 feet back from the sidewalk, because that not only provides an area for parking for all the people that are going to be driving to that retail center or housing complex, but it also doesn't block the view. So we can see the hills. And we're seeing that here in Poway, this demand for more and more setbacks. But what it ends up doing is it ends up killing the idea of any sort of a walkable situation. I mean, have you ever tried to walk in like here, we'll actually just walk down Poway Road or walk down Claremont Mesa Boulevard or walk on Balboa Boulevard in San Diego? You have to travel so far, and most of your time is you're just walking past parking lots. It's like massively inefficient use of land. But these cities have these strict zoning laws that prevent high density housing, they say they want a walkable community. They say they want a nice downtown. But if you look at sort of Main Street USA, like in your typical American city, like thinking about Mayberry RFD, their hardware store and grocery store are right on the sidewalk. Communities in San Diego, new communities in San Diego, like San Elijo Hills, which is sort of near Escondido and San Marcos, they built retail stores right up against the sidewalk with housing above it. And they made it like that little downtown there, kind of nice. Not so heavily car dependent, but that is resisted. So you end up with these cities. They're not vibrant. They're not charming. They lose all their character. And then you have this idea of stroads. And this article was just unbelievable. I was reading it and I was like, God, this is so Poway. I'll include a link in the show notes when I kind of officially post all of this content on the YouTube channel and on Facebook and everywhere else. But check this out. This is one of the graphs that was in the article. And this idea of what are called stroads. And this is a merger of what should be a street and what should be a road. Now, if you can see in the smaller pictures, the one on the bottom left is a street. It's like one lane each direction. Okay, there might be housing there. There might be some diagonal parking. The speed limit is probably going to be like 25, maybe 35, but probably 25 miles an hour. That's a street. Here in Poway, I think Midland Road would be a really good example of that. Now, then in again, if you look, and this is where you need to really think about Europe and the way Europe is designed. When you go into a town in Europe, in England or in Italy or wherever you are, there's a downtown and it's dense. The streets are narrow. People are walking. They live near the shops, and it's a street where it has a low speed limit. But then once you get out of town, then there are roads, like the picture in the bottom right of that graphic, that are just wide open, and where you can just haul ass and go 55, 60 miles an hour and get from one city to the next city. Well, streets are narrow, smaller, community oriented, and lower speed limit. Roads are like not freeways, but close. They're, where you can just get in your car, go 55, 65 miles an hour and blast, and with very few stoplights, just straight on through. And those are going to be roads. We get stroads, which are a merger of the two. And that's what Poway Road is. Poway Road is a classic stroad where you've got Poway Road is a major itinerary, or is the word itinerary, or what's the word? An artery, where people commute. And so people have to drive through Poway Road just to get from their house to the freeway. And at the same time, Poway Road has all of this retail. And all of that retail requires big parking lots with stoplights and left turn lights and everything else. So people that need a road to get out of town to the freeway and get on the road to get to work have to drive through this massive cluster of retail and stoplights and that whole mess. And so you get traffic, frustration, and congestion. And that's what we get with a stroad. And this article spoke to this in great detail. Meanwhile, you get, like I said earlier, you get cities that have all of this open, unused space that is used, frankly, very poorly, all of this land. And you don't have the opportunity to have restaurants or coffee shops. And here's a picture. I mean, this looks very European, but right there, you have a coffee shop in a residential neighborhood with a nice patio, an umbrella. People can have lunch. They can socialize. I mean, like from my house, if I were to walk to a restaurant, I'd probably have to walk about 3/4 of a mile. It's probably the closest one. If I were to walk to a coffee shop, it's at least a mile, maybe a mile and a half, completely unwalkable. But they don't allow this kind of construction in most suburban communities because they're strictly for single family homes, or God forbid, some apartments, but not enough of this. Now, Poway Road is trying to address this. Poway Road is trying to build a sort of kind of walkable community in between Community Road and Carriage Road. And we've seen a lot of the housing development. We haven't seen a lot of the retail fill in the gaps. There's space that's allocated for it, but not a whole lot of companies that are going in. I'm hopeful that they will. And then it would be, in my opinion, if I were the master planner of the city, I would make Poway Road, particularly that area between Carriage and Community, narrow, 25 miles an hour. I make it a street and redirect a lot of the traffic from Poway Road to the north along Espola or on Twin Peaks, and or on the southern border of Poway, just get on Scripps Poway Parkway and blast westbound out to the 15 freeway there. They could do it even if there's an off-ramp off of Scripps Poway Parkway that can connect to the Garden Road community, but is really only for emergency vehicles. There's an opportunity to kind of develop that and make it so the people that are on the eastern end of Poway Road have a way to escape to get on a road without having to drive through the gauntlet of what Poway Road is. But here in our city, we're dealing with all these things the article talked about: minimum parking requirements for retail, big unfilled lots, height limits. I mean, God, I remember back in the 90s, I was helping out a guy that I knew that owned a bar in Poway. It was called JD's. And I was playing music a lot, and our band played there, and he was trying to get more business, and I helped him out. And I walked down Poway Road, and I was dropping off flyers at other businesses, kind of advertising some of their specials for lunch. That is like such an unwalkable street. It is just crazy. Making these walkable communities would be so much better for these towns. So I'm going to include a link to this, but it was just a remarkable article. And here's a picture of a European city where you can see it's highly dense and it's kind of got its own boundaries. And then beyond that, it's country. So they essentially have like urban or semi-urban areas and then country without this sort of hybrid of cities in the country, which create a lot of this conflict. So this article is fascinating to me. I know that the, what do they call them? Strong Towns is an organization around America that are trying to address some of these urban planning issues in communities around the United States. This is a topic they'd love to sink their teeth into. So I just thought I'd share it with you. And by the way, I think the city of Poway should change its motto. It's the city in the country just doesn't fit. It's like some throwback to old ideas in Poway, the history of Poway. It feels good, but it is an inaccurate description of what Poway is today. So, I mean, Poway needs to come up with a new motto. I mean, my placeholder motto is America's best place to raise a family, which, I think many people would likely agree with that. But it's a mess. I mean, and we've got a mess going on in a lot of other communities around California. SB 79, which I talked about earlier, is going to radically transform a lot of suburban areas that are along light rail or main bus lines. And so I think there's going to be more and more of this transformation. And NIMBYs, I think, are beginning to lose more of their power, more of their grip on the local regulatory code, because Sacramento is basically forcing a lot of these cities to open up. And I'm kind of more of a free market guy, so I'm not always necessarily enthusiastic about, the Sacramento dictating to cities what they can and cannot do. But in the end, we just need to let people build homes. And if we let people build homes, housing will become more affordable. And if we let people build more homes and do more construction, we're going to see more integration of housing and retail and restaurant space. We're going to see a lot of positive growth, positive transformation, but there still is too much resistance to new ideas. And it's frustrating. And it's not just frustrating for people that live in these communities. It's frustrating for young people who can't afford a place to live. It's frustrating for people that move to the community that want to work in a reasonably high paying job as an engineer, in some of these high tech businesses, but they can't find a place to live because everything is so insane expensive and there's so few places that are available to live. So this is a huge topic. We can go in a lot of different directions, but I shared my thoughts and a lot of tangents on that. I want to get to one final thing here.